Thank you, Steffi, for having us back on the stage at DLD. And it's classic programming by you to follow that very optimistic scenario by bringing us curmudgeons on to kind of address some of these broader constraints that the world is facing as these tech titans and their new technologies arrive in Washington. I think even this time last year, none of us could have imagined a scenario that we're going to see on Monday where Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos are all sitting in the front row of the inauguration of the president, having spent weeks in Mar-a-Lago. Even Bill Gates has been to Mar-a-Lago, having spent $100 million trying to stop Trump getting elected. He's gone there and professed himself delighted with Trump's commitment to innovation. We're in a whole new world of plutocratic power, or tech plutocratic power. And our two panelists this morning have written books that really were prescient, I think, in identifying some of the problems. If I can very briefly, summarize, I think, with Mariette, a lot of your thesis was about the creeping and increasingly fast move of tech companies in terms of privatizing public space and taking control there. And Gary, your warning was very much that having failed to tame social media, we now face this AI transformation that is arguably far more threatening to every aspect of democracy, and we need to get it right this time. So two great speakers to address this question of, can we save democracy from tech? And I'm going to start with you, Mariette, and just ask, what do you think the ambitions are now, and what's possible that tech might do now they have this seat at the table in Washington that might take what's already been a big hit to democracy to another level? What are you fearing? What's your worst fears here?
Well, it's an unprecedented situation, as you mentioned, where we really see a sort of synergy between Silicon Valley leaders and political leadership. And I think the balance of power may well tip to a irreversible point towards the Silicon Valley leaders, where the initial interest may be to maximize market power, to sell more products. But if you look at the kinds of products and decisions at the nodes where these CEOs sit, think about the strategic importance of satellites, undersea cables. The core infrastructure of our societies is now privatized by tech companies. And so if they can bend the rules, as Elon Musk no doubt will try, towards their private interests, if they can change the democratic institutions that are typically there to provide checks and balances and independent oversight, then during any next elections, their role will be more powerful and more facilitated by these public institutions. And so you will really see a privatization of politics on top of a privatization of so much of our civic life, our public life, and our democracy already.
And when you say privatization of politics, what does that mean?
Well, the situation in the United States is, of course, possible because of the role that money plays in politics. It's incredible, and I think it's a poison. But to have, more of the wealthiest people in the world deciding who has a chance of winning congressional districts, what gets invested in, not only through those campaigns, but also through government funding, what kind of contracts, what kind of oversight, what kind of regulatory actions. You can see how the state becomes an instrument of specific corporate goals. And that, I think, is a risk which can go, have ripple effects in multiple places. For example, a foreign policy that's informed by Elon Musk's needs has implications for the relation with China, has implications for the relation with us here in Europe. I am worried about the sense of paralysis that I feel in Europe with regard to what's coming. It's 2 days from the inauguration where also our democratic tech policy in Europe will become subject to a trade war. We have as Mark Zuckerberg asking Elon Musk to consider sanctions of antitrust cases, for example, as a trade barrier, and to negotiate those against, let's say, the sale of pharmaceuticals from Europe in the United States. So the whole idea of the rule of law comes under corporate pressure that way.
So Gary, what do you think could happen? What's your nightmare scenario for how this unfolds now the tech bros are taking over the White House?
I mean, my nightmares are similar. The word irreversibility particularly struck me from what you said. The reason that I wrote my book, Taming Silicon Valley, was to try to influence the 2024 election, because I saw that irreversibility. And I love the title of this session, How to Save Democracy from Tech, but it may be too late, is the honest truth of it. We're certainly seeing, enormous influence from the tech oligarchs. That was kind of what the book was about, and it's much worse than I imagined it. I was actually writing the book while I was here last year. It's much worse than I think I could have imagined. The only thing I can really add to that is to talk a little bit about where AI fits into that specifically. So one is, I think we're going to be hugely vulnerable to things like cybercrime right now for a whole bunch of different reasons. So one is that large language models are really good at committing cybercrime. There was an amazing study that just came out yesterday from the National AI Institute in the States showing that basically if you do repeated jailbreaking attacks, you can get these systems to do anything. So you can get them to write phishing letters, for example, and you just do it in volume and you get through. So the probabilities on any one attack might be low, but if you do it 10 or 20 times or 30 times, you get whatever it is you want. And you can think this is very much like what we've seen in spam in general, right? You don't need to have high quality spam in order to be effective. You just need to find some suckers somewhere, like the person who spent the $750,000 or whatever it was thinking that Brad Pitt was in love with her. So you just find your marks eventually. And these tools are extremely good at that. They also make very vulnerable, or it looks like they may make vulnerable software code. So the large language models that everybody's enamored of don't really understand system architecture. They don't really understand security, et cetera. So they're building lots of vulnerabilities in. And then you combine that with the Trump administration, which is clearly hell-bent on reducing regulation and scaring away anybody that knows how to enforce any of this stuff. And it's just like a perfect storm. And so, likely we'll see very bad cyber attacks this year. There are many other things to worry about too, but
the absence of regulation, you think, also means there'll be a lot of unforeseen consequences as well.
Exactly. I mean, how could it be otherwise? And it's not just the absence, it's the gutting of regulation, right? They're going to get rid of many, many regulations around this, and they're also going to scare away most of the talent. So, I know people in Washington that are not at the highest levels, and they're all looking for jobs and wondering what they're going to do, and can't imagine continuing to do the civil servant kind of stuff that they did around enforcement and so forth in the new regime.
Because there will also be a personal witch hunt. I think we have to be very specific about that. So it's not only indeed deregulation and capture through money and specific interests, conflicts of interest, as we see with Elon Musk, but this whole so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which for all intents and purposes is not a real department, and at least Musk will not take an official appointment, which means he would have to distance himself from his corporate governance and interests the way that typically government appointees
And he likes
would.
to go after individuals. He went after me once, and he's gone after medium-level civil servants and so forth. He's gone after a friend of mine. And when that happens, people get death threats and so forth. I have gotten emails lately saying, Gary, what are you going to do in this regime? Are you going to get personal security? I never even thought of that question before.
Well, academics who've been researching disinformation around elections have already been in the line of fire for about 4 years, meaning court cases against them, meaning hearings before Congress with, very absurd allegations. It already has influenced academic freedom, freedom of expression. Oh, the irony. Those who claim to defend freedom of expression will actually not grant freedom of expression to their critics, whether it's in academia or in civil society. The same Elon Musk that is waving the flag of freedom of expression is taking to court civil society organizations that dare, with their freedom, to point out that advertisers find their products advertised against extremist content, and just ask the question, is this where you want to be with your shirt or your drink or your car? And so listen not only to what these people are saying, look at what they're doing, and it will inform you more than this panel can about what's coming. And let me warn you, it will be dark.
Now, do you think they have a specific plan, these coup leaders, or is it going to be a Silicon Valley kind of ready, fire, aim, sort of make it up as we go along?
I think that there are multiple plans. I think that, you know, the famous line that Steve Bannon used was flood the zone with shit, and they're going to do that again. That is part of the plan, is to see what sticks and to throw, sorry for the metaphors, but you know. They're going to try many different things, and they will see what's effective, and they want to break down the opposition by doing that. That's part of it. Certainly they want to undermine, for example, AI regulation. You know, they brought in many people there who were very hostile to any form of regulation whatsoever. So that will be, you know, one
Although Elon
side of it.
does worry about the existential threats.
Elon's the most interesting player in this, in that I think he is genuinely sincere about concern about AI risk. I've emailed him about it. I've talked to him about it. I think, you know, he really is concerned. But he's the same guy who signed the famous pause letter saying for 6 months we shouldn't build GPT-5. It didn't say we shouldn't do any AI research at all, but it said we shouldn't build GPT-5. And while he was doing that, he was buying 10,000 H100s, building his own AI company. So, I mean, he has a huge split between genuinely caring about AI risk back to at least 2014. I think his only academic publication is on that. But also he's like deeply competitive with Sam, who he despises. And so, you know, he's these two different strands. If there's any AI regulation that does get through, it will probably be about long-term risk and stuff like that, because that's his special concern. Other kinds of things like misinformation, he doesn't want any regulation around that at all. There's no chance that we'll get any regulation around that.
Do you think there's specific plans that you know, this was a coherent plot that was plotted for years, or is it more?
I mean, I have no evidence for that. So let me stick to facts there too. But that doesn't mean there wasn't more. I mean, we've all seen that, what is it, the 2025?
Yeah,
what's
Project 2025.
Project 2025, which did look like a bit of a strategy. It's not been copied one-on-one. But I do think that the tendency has been to maximize power. Whether you look at blitzscaling, whether you look at lobbying, whether you look at revolving door hiring of people, whether you look at funding through campaign financing. And so in some ways we can say this is all, you know, fair game, because companies will take the space they've been given. And that is also something I would like to point out. We heard President Biden in his farewell speech warning against, you know, these tech titans consolidating power in dangerous ways. Well, consecutive Democrat-led and Republican-led governments have allowed this situation to emerge by trusting the market too much, by not taking the defense of democracy and the rule of law seriously enough. And so the space that was open has been taken because there were not enough guardrails. And I think that that's the lesson. And now that we need them the most, the likelihood of them being adopted is the least. And I think, you know, the whole cluster of what this means and what Gary was talking about can also be seen in the responses to the wildfires in California, which is an absolute disaster. But there we see a politicizing of emergency aid, for example, because California and Los Angeles are led by Democrats. And there's a huge amount of disinformation about funding towards firefighters, about causes, about arson, you know, all kinds of disinformation.
About protected fish as well, isn't it?
All kinds of disinformation that makes a natural disaster and the terrible situation that has caused for, you know, a number of people even worse, erodes the trust between people. And I think that those are sort of hints at how a combination of an algorithm, a platform, political power, state power, and societal needs are going to clash in new ways in the United States.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess, you know, they're coming in with this Zuckerberg move fast, break things idea, which actually they're going to have a rude awakening when they get to Washington. It's actually quite hard to break things quickly in government, I suspect. And I think that maybe my first reason for some hope that this may not be the last election and there may be a chance to save democracy is that this is going to be a mess. And it may actually, you know, make the public think, hang on, we don't like this. But do you think that's likely? And what else can we do if we can save democracy?
Well, I'll take those separately. I have thought about that quite a bit. I don't have any final answers there, but I think one thing to think about is there are going to be multiple problems that emerge from breaking many different things, and they're going to emerge on different timescales. So, for example, if they really repeal vaccines, which they might actually do, which is insane to take back, one of the 10 greatest scientific discoveries of all time, that's going to be bad, but it will take time to play out, right? Measles will become a thing again in the United States, but it won't become a thing in 6 months because most people are already vaccinated. So some things will happen very quickly and some not. So I think that we will see prices go way up, and people tend to care about that at the polls. So if there's any hope for any regime change from here, it's probably in the midterm elections after prices have gone up. That we see some kind of change. So that's, one kind of answer. The other is the only way we're really going to see things is if the public starts to understand what's going on and protest, boycotts things, and so forth. As long as the public is fairly passive about it, I don't think there's any hope to save democracy.
And what would you see as the things that could be done right now by those of us that are opposed to the kind of changes that are likely to be ushered in?
Well, I think the state level is really the space to watch. We've already seen, for lack of agreement on the federal level with the deeply divided Congress over the past years, including on tech regulation, that states are increasingly stepping up because people do want their kids to be protected. They do want some data protection. They worry about specific tech aspects, but I don't know that it will be enough to counterbalance what's coming, because on top of, let's take the vaccine example that Gary mentioned, there will be disinformation around it. And so it is going to be hard for people to know exactly, cause and effect of policy and their grievance, and to know also who to blame if all the blame is easily pushed to someone else. So I recently talked to a member of the Polish government where a new government has to sort of repair the damage of years of illiberal leadership. And he sighed, saying how hard it was. So the world, those of us who don't want to see creeping towards authoritarianism was very relieved at the Polish election. But the people who are now repairing what's been broken are actually finding how hard it is. And I don't think we should underestimate how quickly things can be broken. It is much easier to break than to build.
Gary, a big point. And what else would you like to see done?
In my fantasy, we would boycott generative AI. And there are many reasons for that. So one is it's extremely energy intensive. It's going to be bad for the climate. Two is it's terrible for artists. They're ripping off artists left and right. They're institutionalizing that in the UK and so forth. Three is it's unreliable in all kinds of ways, which lead to misinformation. It can be exploited to generate misinformation. Four is it's giving a lot of power to Silicon Valley companies, mostly on promise. Like, the actual impact of generative AI has been minimal if you look at how many businesses have adopted it, or how much productivity has increased and so forth. But we're giving enormous amount of power to the people running those companies. And so and the reason they're getting that is because there's adoption, mostly from free users from this stuff. If the free users went away, then the justification for these insane valuations would go away, and we would stop giving them power because we fantasize that they're going to be extremely wealthy. So I think a boycott of generative AI, as unlikely as that is, would actually have some impact on the dynamics of all of this.
Yeah, that does feel so out there in terms of unlikely, but it does.
If the alternative is authoritarianism, and we haven't even talked also about things like how they're going to be able to manipulate people using LLMs. So you remember how people worried about Facebook feeds influencing people's thoughts. LLMs can do even more subtle things that people don't even notice. So that's another way in which we're giving enormous power to these companies. So it is very unlikely that the public will coalesce, but the alternative is really dark here.
Now, do you think that Europe will withstand these pressures much better than the US system?
The European system is better equipped to withstand the pressures because we have coalition governments that sort of temper extreme shifts in most countries. We have a track record of more guardrails around tech, but I fear that the pressure on the enforcement part will become severe, and I'm not sure. I'm hopeful, but not sure, worried that the European Commission will keep its spine straight. At the same time, even in Europe that prides itself on being a super regulator, there is so much that has not been done yet in terms of using public procurement as a lever to be less dependent on not only US tech companies, but a handful of them. So to look much more at redirecting that public spending. There's a huge push for more investment. The now famous or infamous Draghi report that talks about the innovative capabilities of the European economy and the investments that are needed. And those will have to be directed towards European alternatives, what people refer to as Eurostack, a European stack of technologies that can make Europe more autonomous, more sovereign, but also more resilient against the trade shocks, against the security shocks, against the geopolitical dynamics that are about to intensify. And so it's quite common to say, isn't there already too much regulation in Europe? But if we even leave regulation completely out of the equation through procurement and through investment, I do think a lot can be done, must be done, and I hope the political leadership that is also marked by Trumpism amongst us here in Europe will be strong enough, united enough, and will have the clarity of mind to look at the tech aspects of things, because it's obviously not the only thing, but it's a layer that is so incredibly important in forming the way our societies are run, the way our national security plays out, and it is something that politicians around the world are wrestling to grapple with.
Now, we used to discuss at DLD how you could take tech as a way to modernize democracy and make a democracy that felt much more satisfying and more trustworthy to the public. I presume that ship has sailed now, and we just need to focus on stopping the guys that are there in Washington.
In principle, we could still do that. We have so much kind of crud and corruption and personal interest right now standing in the way. It's still interesting to think about things like citizen assemblies that technology could orchestrate. Like, I wouldn't completely count out the positive potential of technology. It's just the situation we find ourselves in right now makes all that hard. I don't think we should give up those dreams.
So we're out of time. Just each of you, one point you'd like this audience to take away, one challenge maybe for what they should say to other people about how we can save democracy from tech?
Start focusing on it with the same ambition as you focus on building your business, raising your kids, and taking care of your health, for example.
I'll say, as a North American, Europe, you are our last hope to get this right. North America has abdicated its responsibility to try to...
Yep, thank you very much.
All right.